once again. We've touched on the topic of ultra-processed foods on the show in the past. We've all eaten them. Most of us will probably have consumed some today. I'm sure I did. It was a bag of cola bottle gummies. They were delicious. But you know what I mean? We would consume roughly 50% of our calories from ultra-processed foods, according to the Heart and Stroke Foundation. That's the stuff that you find in the middle aisles of grocery shelves. They're usually things that have they're things with long lists of ingredients, many things that you wouldn't have in your cupboard at home. They are things that advertise that they are light or that they are healthy or that they are, low fat. They are the kinds of things that you see on TV. I mean, essentially, they're a product more than a food, right? And we actually had this really cool conversation on this topic with Chris Van Tulleken, who's a British author who wrote a book called Ultra Processed People, The Science Behind the Food That Isn't Food. And here's what he had to say when we spoke to him.
It is all around us, and it makes up, whether you're in the UK or Canada, it makes up 60% of the calories that we eat. If you've got a teenager, it could well be 80 or 90%. The research probably underestimates the amount we eat, but this is our food culture. In North America and the UK, this is what we eat.
Right. So why is that? And why aren't we we're becoming increasingly aware perhaps of some of the dangers here, but the jury is still out in some ways as well. I mean, there's been a steady stream of research linking UPFs to health conditions of all sorts, but we still continue to consume them. Could it be because we can't help it? We're hooked. We're hooked. They're built that way to hook us. Again, it's a topic that is a subject of debate. We're still uncovering more about it. A lot of us understand the addiction to things like nicotine or alcohol or drugs in general. But cookies, chips, really? Joining me now is Dr. Vera Tarman. She is Medical Director of Renascent, in one of Canada's largest treatment centers for substance abuse. And she's author of the 2019 book called Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction. Dr. Tarman, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Oh, thank you. I'm delighted to speak with you today.
Yeah, this is one of those issues. If you think about the way people talk about food sometimes, we sometimes use the language of addiction when it comes to food. I can't put down those cookies, or I'm addicted to those new chips. But we don't use it in a way that we don't seem to view it in the same way as we would say alcohol or tobacco or things, or drugs for that matter. But is it true that we can be addicted to it?
Oh, we absolutely can be addicted to it. Now, one of the reasons that people do dismiss it is that they say, well, you really can't be addicted to food because you have to eat it 3 times a day at least.
Right.
But when we talk about food addiction, really what we're specifically talking about is sugar addiction and processed food addiction. We're not talking about vegetables, oranges, tomatoes. We're talking about your local grocery store, and it's all the stuff on this in the middle of like the cereals and the muffins and the cakes. That's the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, I'd read somewhere that there's almost a push in your field to call it ultra-processed food addiction, not food addiction per se.
Yeah, I actually personally like the idea of food addiction myself, but I understand that ultra-processed food addiction is probably where we're going to go, because most people can kind of get their head around that one. But I like the concept of food addiction itself, because addiction, like any other mental health disorder, is progressive and chronic and progressive. And you can actually, at some point, depending on what level of food addiction you're at, be addicted to eating foods that otherwise people wouldn't find addictive, or just be addicted to eating itself. So food addiction covers the whole umbrella. But usually we're talking about the specifics like sugar. The sugar is where it starts. That's the universal.
Yeah, tell me about this, because it's evolved over time, right? I mean, again, the way that it's been explained to me in the past is that, companies that want to sell more of their food or their interest is getting you to eat more of it. So they doctor it so you will, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what they do. And that's why we're looking at that term ultra-processed food, because you don't see the farmer's market doing that. They just put it out there and people buy it, or they don't buy it. And I guess they're competing, but with the processed food industry, they really have to compete. And it's a finite audience. I mean, it's all of us who have to eat, and they're going to try to make their product something that I will reach for instead of. And so then we end up doctoring it in multiple ways. So that's the actual processing of it, which is the texturing, the flavoring, the coloring, the amount of sugar. There's various people who have talked about the bliss spot for various foods. So it's all about how do I make my product such that you will buy it. And that makes foods very craveable, potentially addictive. But for a very small proportion of the population, maybe 15, 20% in the obese, we're saying as high as 40 or 50%. It's more than that. It can actually become a phenomena of where the focus now is on food, just like the alcoholic starts to favor their alcohol over other behaviors. They're going to choose to drink rather than go out to their son's baseball game. That happens with not everybody, but some people who end up eating too much of this processed food. The condition develops into its own phenomena, which we call addiction. And then, depending on how bad it gets, they too will choose to, I would rather watch eat my Haagen-Dazs and watch TV rather than go out tonight and do the things that I normally do. And the more you do that, the more that becomes part of a person's life. And that addictive pattern is the same as any other pattern that we see, to the point where the person will say, hey, I've got to stop because I've got diabetes now, or I'm obese, like I want to lose weight. And they still can't stop. Like the craving to eat is so potent. And that doesn't happen to everybody, but it happens to enough people that those of us like myself in the field are saying, come on, let's take this seriously, in the same way that we take alcohol and cocaine seriously.
What is happening in the brain? I mean, is it similar to what's happening
it's
when we
similar.
crave other things, right?
Absolutely. When we talk about addiction, what we're talking about is dopamine. I mean, there's more neurochemicals that are involved, but that's like the granddaddy of all. That's the neurochemical that we mainly talk about, the dopamine surplus that happens with food. So if I just enjoy an orange or a strawberry, I get a nice, pleasurable experience, which is dopamine, but it's normal. It's my birthright to enjoy food. And those of us who talk about food addiction do not say food is fuel, you shouldn't like it. We're saying you should like it appropriately. Enjoy that strawberry or that cherry, but then you'll be able to push your plate away at the end because you're full and you're done. But what happens with processed food is they take that dopamine, which is our natural birthright to enjoy, and they potentiate it through this engineering process. If you flavor something, they put strawberry flavoring into a strawberry to make it ultra strawberry. So it's like ultra processed, it's ultra whatever. And that means it's ultra dopamine. It's too much dopamine. And that's the thing that makes addiction. It's the brain has to adapt to that that boost of dopamine. And once it starts to adapt, that's the phenomena of addiction. You start to develop what we call tolerance. I need more chips to get the same effect as the first. One little bit of chocolate, which was delicious yesterday, now I need the whole bar. And then by next week, I'm exaggerating, but eventually I'm going to need 2 or 3 bars to get, you're getting tolerance. And when that starts to happen, you're trying to chase that initial feeling of just that one little chocolate piece that you had at the beginning. We call that chasing the dragon in the addiction world. You're doing it with food too. And so now you're starting to get this focus on the chocolate or the whatever it is. And that's the phenomenon of addiction. It's the dog chasing its tail, and it can never get the tail. But the more it can't get it, the more it wants it, and it drives a person crazy.
Yeah, I think we've all probably felt that urge to eat something when we're not hungry, and wondered why. We felt the urge to reach for something, maybe not eat hundreds of them, but certainly reach for the bag or not be able to stop when you want to stop. I mean, I think we've all been there. Oreos is mine. Oreos is fine, so I don't buy them. But
dopamine is false hunger. It's false hunger. It makes you feel hungry, but you're not.
Tell me a bit about, maybe you've mentioned already what the impacts are, because I think we don't necessarily think of this as victimless, but I don't think we think of it in the same way as we do drug addiction or smoking. We don't. But as you point out, there are health impacts of this as well.
Oh my God, there are. And it's probably on the level of addiction, it's probably similar to smoking. So if I start smoking cigarettes, I'm not getting lung cancer tomorrow. I'm going to get lung cancer or emphysema. I'm going to get that in 10, 15 years. But it's pretty much in the books that I'm going to get something. It takes a while though. So now if I start using crystal meth, by next year, I'm on the street with no more rent, and my pants are hanging off my body because I'm so skinny. So, I mean, some addictions take you harder. Fentanyl takes you harder. Alcohol, not as quickly as those drugs, but they get you too. But sugar, it is just as devastating as any of the other addictions. It just takes longer, and we don't call it. Like if I die of an alcohol-related disease, it'll say on my autopsy, it'll say cirrhosis secondary to alcoholism.
Right.
We should be saying diabetes secondary to sugar addiction. We don't. We just call it diabetes. We should be saying obesity-related conditions secondary to the processed food that we're eating, but we don't. We stop at the fact that, and if you think about what are the leading causes of death in society, cancer, stroke, and heart disease, of course, we all have to die, but we don't have to die so young and with these lingering chronic illnesses like diabetes and whatnot. And we should be calling those things diabetes secondary to our food, our processed food addiction.
Dr. Vera Tarman is with us this half hour. She is Medical Director of Renascent, which is one of Canada's largest treatment centers for substance abuse. She's author of 2019's Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction. This is a subject we've touched on before on this show, but ultra-processed foods and why we crave them, why we eat them when we're not hungry, what the impact is, what's happening in our brains. Dr. Tarman, I suppose maybe we can start broadly. What do you think's needed in the regulatory way? Is there anything that we should be doing to try to curb this, the way we tackled, the way we continue to talk about tackling alcoholism, the way we are tackling smoking and so on?
Well, we have to take it seriously. Like, that's the thing. You nailed it right at the very beginning. We kind of laugh about it, say, yeah, we're addicted, but we don't really acknowledge that we are. And part of that is because the food industry has no incentive to help us with this. And it's the same as the cigarette industry has no incentive. And we often say that sugar is the new tobacco. Like, it's basically the same. Like I said, it's a similar process of a development of the addiction is the ubiquity of everybody used to smoke, everybody eats sugar now. So just the first thing is we have to acknowledge this and take it seriously. That's the first thing. And then what we have to do is find some way to manage with like the food industry is not it's not our friend on this. So how to get politicians to be willing to tax it. So taxing is one thing. And I believe that there are countries that do that, but I don't think we've done that, or not in any significant way. We've even made the argument to say, well, we can tax people who require things like diabetes and all this stuff because they're eating.
Because oftentimes you're sort of targeting disadvantaged communities, right? I mean,
Exactly.
there's a lot of nuances.
It's not fair to them. You're right, because especially where we talk about food deserts, where you can't get any food at all except processed food in a particular area. You're right. We're targeting the wrong people. So some of it has to be policy, but we have to get the political will, and part of that is going to be that I think personally myself that we have to get people themselves in the same way that we did with tobacco, in the same way that we're doing it with the opiate crisis. It's the families themselves, it's the people themselves that are saying enough already. And so how do we do that? We do that by our purse. We don't buy that stuff, for one thing. Okay, here's one. This is all on the level of people. Now, if you're a smoker, you feel like a pariah. You have to go outside and smoke out in the wintertime. Well, okay, this is going to sound crazy, but I would love to see the day where we ask people with desserts and chips and whatnot to go outside. And if they're going to eat that stuff, they should eat it out there. Let them, I don't want to say feel like a pariah, but we open it up as something that's, oh, let's have this. We're having such a good time, that it's not part of the good time, that it's actually a poison, and that if you're going to do it, well, we'll tolerate it. Okay.
Right. I suppose there's no such thing as secondhand chips, but I see where you're going with this. I mean, I think it's, but I see what you're trying to say is we need to change our mindset around this a little bit.
Yes, the social norms.
Simply harmless smoking. How about individually? I mean, you've dealt with people who have food addiction.
Okay.
What do you tell them? I mean, where do you begin if you feel like you want to fight back against those urges?
Okay, so you actually said a very interesting thing. You said there's no such thing as secondhand chips. But in a way, you could make the argument that there is. Because when we're talking about addiction, it's all about people, places, things. It's cues. If it's in my face constantly, I'm going to reach for it. When we've done research like that, where you have the little bowl of jellies in front of you on your desk, more people will eat that stuff because it's there. And if it's ubiquitous like this, it's a kind of secondhand exposure. Sure. And that stuff is potent. With addiction, it's as potent as the substance itself. It's having the constant cues. And that's what the food industry works with. So I think I'm getting wrapped up in getting into a rant. So I don't know if I've answered
No, not at all. I mean, I guess what I was saying, I guess, is, a real push around getting people to stop smoking and forcing it outside and so on was the idea of the dangers of secondhand smoke.
Yes,
we haven't really seen that in the same way with ultra processed foods. But I guess I was really curious. You've dealt with people directly who have food addiction. Where do you begin to sort of fight back and sort of break the habit, so to speak?
Okay, you know what? One of the things that happens, this is why I'm so happy that you're speaking with me, because whenever I speak publicly, what ends up happening is that people go, "Oh my God, that's me. I thought this was something weird. It's actually me. Why do I go to the fridge constantly and wonder what can I do to feel better?" This is that dynamic. So just becoming when a person comes to see me, just to validate that this is a real thing. This isn't because there's something weird about you. You're greedy, you're a pig, or whatever it is that you're thinking you are. No, this is actually you. You're one of the subset of people who are more vulnerable to addiction. And instead of cigarettes or alcohol, this is typical for women. They go for the cakes, the men go for the beer, at least in the old days. Old days meaning a number of years ago, until the alcohol industry cottoned on, and now they made alcohol very attractive to women too. But anyway, to say that it's not just because of your poor willpower. This is you under the lure of something, of an intentional group of people, what we call dealers, food pushers, who are trying to get you. And there's a subsection of people, and you are one of them, and that is normal. And so many people are like, "Oh my God, thank you." And where do you get that? By me being able to speak like this, and then therefore other people speaking. I have a Facebook group, for example. It's not so much about that specifically. It's about, there are resources out there, and the more that people are talking about it, the more people are starting to develop those resources. And we are actually now at a point, thank God, finally. I've been in this field a long time, and I would say that this year and last year, we're really seeing the tipping point of people coming in, recognizing this, offering services. There is help now. There really is help now for this thing that we call food addiction, which is not an eating disorder. It's a food addiction, and or it's an addiction, processed food addiction, whatever you want to call it. And there are tools, but we're reaching into the addiction tool bag, which we didn't know about before, to use it for food, but it actually exists, and it's helping people.
Well, Dr. Tarman, I appreciate your insight on this. This is a subject you know well. Thank you so much. That'll certainly be food for thought, if you'll excuse the awful pun.
Right on. Thank you so much.